Hello, Friday, November 16th, I think, 2024. I took today off from work because I want to just have a day of R&R and chilling. But I want to do guitar book post because I think it keeps me sane, maybe, I don't know. But today what I want to talk about is basically I have two books. One is on technique and how to physically play the instrument. The other is not actually specifically tied to guitar, and it is about how to practice music. And the analogy I like to use is I have this book called You Can Draw in 30 Days, and I adore it. It's a great book. And I think it is a good analogy for what I want to do with guitar. If you look how he teaches you to draw, it's very stepwise in a linear process, like an assembly line. You start by making your dots. You start connecting the lines of the dots. You continue to add more lines until you get to a point where you have a cube. And then you start to shade the cube to give it its final outcome. And so what I'm trying to do is the same thing, only working up a piece of classical music rather than drawing. And so when I was in my master's degree, basically my current guitar teacher said, your hands are a mess. There's things you can't hear about the music. You don't have a future as a classical guitarist. And so I said, okay, well, if that's the case, then I'm curious why. And just for whatever reason I did this, I said, well, I'm going to study the psychology of learning. And I'm also going to look at all these method books and books that these great players have written where they talk about how their technique and how they think about music and how they practice, and bring that all together in one spot and try to correlated, I think is the word I'll use, with what we know about the psychology of learning from the sciences. Unfortunately for me, and I forget the name of the author, but a gentleman wrote, a reporter wrote a book called How We Learn. And if you want a good audiobook or a good read that is entertaining, and you can also apply some things to your life in terms of how to learn, great book. Like, even if you don't want to apply any of it, it's still an interesting read. And basically, he surveyed all the psychology literature on learning and then distilled that down into a book that is both an entertaining read, understandable to anyone, and something you can apply to your life. And there were two concepts that he puts in that book that I have brought into music and are working quite well. I promise you, I have a book. It's not subtle. It's already paying off. It's going to take some time for me to make videos that demonstrate it, but I'm learning music faster than I've ever learned in my entire life. It's actually kind of gnarly. And the first concept is that there actually are not learning styles. So people say, oh, I'm a visual learner, I'm an oral learner, I learn by touching or doing. It's actually not true. The overwhelming scientific evidence suggests that the way that we learn most effectively is by learning through as many different ways as possible and looking at it through as many ways as possible. So learning it orally, learning it through touch and physical motion, learning visually, learning analytically, and thinking about things. And so what I want to try to do is take all these, well, actually, I'm going to pause on that. I'm going to tell you the second principle. So the first principle is that there's no one style of learning. Second is that one of the most important ways that we learn is through a process called chunking. And the best analogy for that is a phone number. It is relatively hard for the human mind to learn a string of numbers and memorize them. Obviously, a phone number is relatively short. You could do it, but to just learn it in one big chunk is not the way our brains work well. And so the reason that we break it up into a telephone number into 3, 3, 4 is that that chunking of the phone number, we're better off at learning a group of 3, a group of 3, and a group of 4. It's just the way our minds work. And that also creates some shortcuts. So like, for example, if when I was in my master's degree, nobody would ever give me area codes. And it kind of irritated me because I wasn't from the area. And finally, one day I realized everyone just knows that there's only one area code around the Bloomington Normal area of Illinois for some distance. So they just don't bother. And that's another example of how not only does chunking help you memorize all the details, but it creates some logical shortcuts. You don't need to memorize the first 3 digits of the phone number in Bloomington Normal because it's always going to be that same area code. So what I want to do is take those two principles of how can we learn things in as many ways as possible, and how can we chunk this music up, and bring that into the learning of classical music. And so as far as the learning things as many ways as possible, I want to take all the music theory, all the ear training stuff, all the piano proficiency stuff, and apply that. So just as an example, one thing that I'm doing now, I haven't actually touched guitar in about 2 months. I've only been learning things orally on piano. So I've been going la, do, mi, do, ti, la, si, ti, re, mi, fa, mi, re, do, ti, re, fa, si, ti, fa, mi, re, do, ti, do, re, mi, do, la. Haven't played guitar at all. I've just been learning it on mandolin and on piano and on melodica and getting it in my ear. I've also been visualizing. So I close my eyes and I do it real slow and I think of all the notes on the score. And so I can picture in my mind every measure of that Bach prelude. And so again, those are examples of learning things multiple different ways and also using the skills we learn in a music college course to do that. The second thing is the chunking, and I'm going to need to pull the phone out. And I'm going to use a really simple example. Let's say you have a passage that's 3 measures long, and you have multiple in each measure. So there's 3 measures. Each measure has a different scale in it. Now, to keep this example simple, I'm going to have it be the same scale, and you'll see why in a second. So let's say the passage goes ti, re, mi, fa, la, so, ti, do, re, so, la, ti, do, re, mi, fa, so, mi, re, do, re, mi, fa, so, la, ti, do. Where chunking applies to this is I just played a D minor scale and I went from D up to D, and then I played a G scale, G Mixolydian, where I went G up to G, and then I played a C scale, I went C up to C. And where chunking comes in is you can kind of say, you know, rather than memorizing all the different notes here in this passage, going from to D and then G to G, and then C to C, I want to just think about it as I'm going to go only the white keys, or only in the key of C major, and I'm going to go D up to D, then I'm going to go G up to G, and C up to C. And that's where that chunking comes in. Rather than memorizing all the notes, you're memorizing like the start and the end point. And I already know these scales. I know it's all the white keys. If you don't have a strong music theory background, just know that we're just talking going up from one note to one note, and then one note to one note, one note to one note, in all white keys. And this even works in cases like Bach where you have multiple scales. So you have this passage where it's like, and so the idea here is like, that was again another 3 measure passage, this time at 3 different scales. But I wasn't memorizing all the individual notes. I was saying, you know, I start here and then go down here and then go up the scale. I start here, go here, and then go up that scale. And so this process expedites the process of memorization, and it's not subtle. I'm learning things very quickly. It's cool. So that's what I'm going to be posting off in the next couple weeks is how that process works.